Welcome once again to the Solid Signal podcast for the week of April 17th, 2017. I am, as always, your host, Stuart, and I want to thank those of you who are listening for your kind attentiveness, and I will hope to keep you entertained for the next 5 minutes or so. The topic for this week's conversation is, of course, the FCC repack. What am I talking about? Last week was a significant week in the history of television, and most people don't realize it because the FCC concluded what they called their forward and reverse auctions. You see, for the last 3 years, the FCC has been actively soliciting broadcasters to try to get them to either give up their frequencies altogether or sell their licenses back so that they can move to a different license. It's been an interesting process, and I think it didn't go as well as the FCC had hoped. They had, I think, hoped to get 1,000 stations interested in doing something like this, and they really didn't get that. They got about 160, 170, something like that. And so they took other actions, which I will get to in a minute. Anyway, the whole process was designed to make sure that they could free up frequencies for use for cellular data. You see, the frequency range used for broadcast television really isn't all necessary. There just aren't as many broadcast television stations as was once envisioned, and more importantly, technology is so much better than it was 75 years ago that you don't need these huge empty spaces in between stations to make sure that nobody's signal stomps on top of anybody else's. So the goal is to take all the stations that are left and pack them into a much smaller area. In this case, we're talking about VHF channel 7 all the way up to UHF channel 36, where once you could go all the way up to UHF channel 83, but there just isn't a need for that. What's going to happen to all of this extra space? It's going to go to cell carriers, and that's another thing that we saw this week is who bid on that frequency range, who got those licenses. Well, it turns out the big winners were T-Mobile and Dish. It's pretty easy to see T-Mobile's game here. Honestly, they were a little bit too late to the party and weren't able to snag a lot of those LTE frequencies for themselves back in 2008, the last time there was this kind of auction. However, there is some real question as to what Dish will do with all of this wireless spectrum that it's bought over the last 5 to 7 years, because they have to do something with it. That's a law. If they don't do something with it, then the government can actually take it back. I think everybody knows that Dish wants to have some sort of wireless service, but it's kind of surprising that they haven't unveiled anything yet, considering how long we've been talking about it. I'm waiting myself with bated breath, and I'll leave you with that particular visual in your mind. It's also worth noting that even though news reports didn't say anything about it, AT&T snagged almost $1 billion worth of licenses, meaning they weren't exactly left out of this party. You know, a lot of what's going on here is really to secure short-term 4G and LTE growth. This isn't necessarily about 5G, which is going to be the next generation of super awesome cell internet, and eventually will take the place of 4G and LTE and all the earlier technologies. But this is more of a short-term issue, and that's why you see T-Mobile kind of playing catch-up here. It's very interesting, and the real question is, of course, what happens now? You can go to the FCC's websites, and you can find out plans for your area, who plans to move, who plans to do what, when, and there are timetables. I will just say, don't give them a lot of credence, because things do change. Things slip, time frames move, and all you need to know is that you do not need to do anything right now. When you do need to do something, if you need to do something, it will only be for those people who get their television over an antenna. If you get your television over cable, satellite, or streaming, you don't have to worry about anything at all having to do with this. So do not be concerned. But if you do get your TV over an antenna, I kind of actually hope you do, because it's kind of a neat thing to do. There will come a point that you will need to rescan for channels if you are in an area where a station is moving or going dark. When that happens, you'll have at least 1 month's notice. If you watch the station at all, you're going to see where you see crawls at the bottom and slides and commercials and whatever, telling you that on a particular date you're going to need to rescan for channels or you're going to lose that station. It's not a big deal rescanning for channels. It takes about 5 minutes. It is different on every television, unfortunately, so I can't give you a huge guide to it. But the most important thing you need to know is that it's super fast. Even if you ignore all of the warnings ahead of time, you're maybe 5 minutes away from getting everything that you need. Several years ago, I forecasted that up to 75% of stations would be either going dark or reassigning their frequencies. I didn't quite get to that level. I think it's something around 25% are actually either going dark or reassigning their frequencies, and really only about 33 stations out of all the thousands are going dark. So things didn't exactly go the way I expected or the way the FCC expected, and that's okay. There's still enough room to reassign all the frequency that's necessary for cellular data and keep all the stations that are going to be there. And that's really, as I said, it's great news because it means continued more choice and more content for you if you watch broadcast television, more reason to put up an antenna. That's about it for the Solid Signal podcast this week. If you have ideas for future podcasts, be sure to click on that orange Suggest a Topic button on the upper right-hand corner of the Solid Signal blog, blog.solidsignal.com. I want to thank each and every one of you who takes the time to listen for giving me 5 to 7 minutes of your time every week. It is sincerely appreciated. So until next time, have a great one.